We just need to answer the nice questions that are posed at us. Which I'm really grateful for. Yeah. Hi, Sharon.
Hi there. Hello.
Hi, Sharon.
Hey, all.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. We are now live on YouTube. And I want to welcome you to another virtually connecting session from the Digital Pedagogy Lab. And I'm excited today to be your virtual buddy. And before we get started, I want to let the on-the-ground people introduce themselves, starting with our on-site buddy, Kate.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Malloy. I'm the on-site buddy. I'm a DPL fellow this year, and I'm in Kevin's inclusive design track.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Kevin, and I'm leading the inclusive design track, but I think I'll put off talking about it because two folks who are doing that track are in here, and they're probably better judges of what we're doing at this point.
Well, so hi everyone, I'm Maida. I flew all the way across from Pakistan, and I'm here in Kevin's track, inclusive design.
Hi, my name is Stephanie, and I'm actually the event coordinator for DPL.
And you're doing an awesome job. And I'm Bonnie Stewart, and I am also here in Fredericksburg, Virginia. I am not doing the inclusive design track. I feel a little bit left out. I am leading a digital scholarship track, and I either have the advantage of getting to say whatever I want because there's no one here to corroborate, or I don't have my own posse with me, which is possibly a different way of seeing it. But we're having a great time.
For sure.
You always have good theme music, though. So you may not have a posse, but you always have good theme music. So let's go. We'll start with Lorna. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi there, my name's Lorna Campbell, and I lead the Open Education Resources Service here at the University of Edinburgh. I usually work from home in Glasgow, but I'm actually in the office in Edinburgh today. So I'll keep my mic on mute when I'm not speaking because there's a bit of background noise here. So it's lovely to see everyone, and I thoroughly enjoyed seeing the karaoke pictures from last night, I have to say.
I
Very
left
classy
in that bar. I just want to be super clear, and I was sober. It was a musical challenge that, yes. Anyway, we shall never speak.
My lips are sealed.
Sharon, do you want to introduce yourself or share a karaoke horror story?
Oh God, karaoke horror story. No, no thanks. Hi, I'm Sharon Flynn. I'm joining you from Galway in the west of Ireland. I am I'm project manager of a national project to enhance digital capacity in teaching and learning across the 7 universities in Ireland, and I work with Kate, who's behind you there, and it's lovely to join you all the way from Galway.
And Vanessa.
Yes.
Well, I'm not really involved in all this. Call me a digital camp follower of online learning. In my retirement years, everybody needs a retirement hobby, and then I inflicted on whoever I can around me sort of to spread the word. But here in Yuma, Colorado, fairly isolated, high plains, 32 miles from Kansas, and much closer to Kansas culturally and topographically than to the rest of the state.
Oh, thank you. And Terry.
Hi, everyone. I'm Terry Green. I work in learning technology at Fleming College here in Peterborough, Ontario. I'm north of you.
I can look north and almost see you.
I see you, yeah.
Oh, yep, there we go.
And then we had two new people join us. Sybil, would you like to introduce yourself? You know, they both volunteered to stay muted, so I'm going to assume that they might want to for now. I'm not going to make them introduce themselves. But why don't we go ahead and get started? So, Maida, Kevin, tell us, what's inclusive design?
You want to start, or would you like to? Okay. So inclusive design can mean a lot of different things, right? And so the way I'm introducing it to folks here is that we actually start the conversation about inclusion by discussing exclusion. So what does it mean to be excluded, in particular in learning spaces? We share some experiences of our own with, times that we might have felt excluded from a particular learning space or environment we're in, and then what the consequences of that are, right? So does it cut off opportunities? Does it close off avenues for people? So what are the consequences of not being inclusive, basically, are some of the questions that we started tackling with. And then what goes into kind of an ethic of inclusion? Because the thing that makes inclusive design hard is a lot of the questions are sort of context specific, right? What are you designing? What kind of learning space are you designing? Are you designing an online course that you'll teach, or are you helping other people as an instructional designer but not teaching a course? And we have a really great group of folks from different institutional perspectives and jobs and places in their career. So we've had a lot of really good kind of sharing of experiences about that. And then ultimately what comes out of it is we're all writing our manifestos for inclusive design. So tomorrow morning we will be manifestoing. Some people are still working hard on their manifestos, and so we're taking some time to work through that today as well. But I'm excited because we're going to try to create some digital space to put these manifestos, or at least those who want to put them in there, and we're going to share them out with everybody, whether it's at DPL or virtually connecting or anyone who wants to look at them, basically.
I'd love to bring these back to my fall classes at the university.
Awesome.
And have them think about that kind of
Cool.
thing. What's in your manifesto?
What's in my manifesto? I don't want to say much, but I'm a huge fan of theatrics and drama.
Yeah.
I'm not a drama person, but still. So I have penned down a rap song, and that's what I'm going to present tomorrow.
Yes.
But I think I would just like to add something to what Kevin said over here. Since I'm from, and I'm really sorry for mentioning it again and again, since I'm from Pakistan, South Asia, when you guys talked about inclusion and exclusion in the US, it's very different. We have a very different idea of inclusion and exclusion back at home. So at first I felt like, ooh, this is not the right kind of place for me, or maybe I'm in a very wrong or incorrect course. But then again, I started thinking more about it and discussed it with my colleagues back at home. And they said, you can always bridge things up. And then in retrospect, I started seeing things coming together, and that's what really mattered at the end. And I think I started picking up, okay, this makes more sense to me than it really did.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always hard to enter a completely new context in a country that you don't work in. Like I'm from Canada, and obviously the parallels with the US and education are probably greater, and still there are conversations I end up in. I went to the rape culture workshop yesterday, and we don't have Title IX in the same way, right? So we just have different policy infrastructures. And even in that tiny way, there's that sense of how do I connect my own context to this conversation, but that bridging piece is neat. In my own track, I'm doing the digital scholarship track, and I wasn't 100% sure sort of what that would necessarily mean. What we've got are a number of people. I've got 12 amazing people. Frankly, obviously, since no one is here to argue with me, I can say that it is clearly I have the best people and the best. I'm joking. But I've got a really amazing group of folks who are about 4 or 5 are community college educators. 6 are in universities. 1 is an independent scholar. And we are all working together to consider how we bridge our different contexts to discuss what does it mean to do scholarship? What is kind of the reputational economy of the academy, right? This circle of what counts and who does what and who gets published where and what kind of status you have and what you have to do. And then the reputational economy of the digital, which is much more of an attention economy, and how do you get stuff out there and how do you build networks or how do you get seen? And in that intersection between the two, there is some really rich work that can benefit both, but trying to figure out how to bridge into what from our own context makes the most sense to work on. Cool. So one of the things that my folks will be doing tomorrow morning is just a very brief slide deck. Each person is contributing 1 slide that encapsulates what they're thinking about or what challenges they're bringing with them or what kind of work they want to do. Because some people have to go back with deliverables and others don't. So I've kind of focused it down so hopefully we can go through and do a little bit of a, here's our stuff, and then we will hopefully share that out on Twitter tomorrow as well.
Thank you both for, or I should say all, I mean both tracks and everybody in the room for that kind of introduction to what you've been thinking about. And I was watching on Twitter some of the discussions around inclusive designs and digital scholarships and accessibility. So if you guys, from each of you, if you had to give 2 tips for someone to get either started in inclusive design or digital scholarship, what would be your elevator, this is how you get started speech, or escalator, or better yet, take the stairs and walk and we can talk longer.
And then get the whole version of it.
Yeah.
So I would start with inclusive design by suggesting that while there are sort of, tips and tricks and specific practices that would work well with this idea of inclusive design, that we have to approach it as an ethic, as a worldview, rather than a set of discrete things to do or not to do. So seeing it as a larger philosophical approach, a set of lenses that I'm looking through at my institution and the students and the work that I'm doing. So that would be my biggest tip. In fact, I'll leave it at 1 actually, instead of even 2, just because so many times we want deliverables or do this thing and now you're inclusive. And if it's not an ethic informing all of our practice, it's going to be much more difficult and incomplete.
And that's kind of something I would put out for anybody thinking about Digital Pedagogy Lab. One of the conversations that came up in my track this morning was someone mentioning, a lot of work in Digital Pedagogy Lab on site ends up really being the work of orality, in the sense that we are gathered together. It is kind of a virtual campfire. Our t-shirts this year have a little campfire right on the back, and we're gathered around. It's present, it's in time. You have the limitations of real time, but you also have that kind of informality and capacity to build trust. Whereas what we're often asked to do in scholarship is that high literacy piece of analytic outputs, what's measurable. We're not saying there's not a place for that, but certainly it's important to make time for this work. And if you're thinking about coming here, it's probably best to approach with a willingness to come and be around a table and do a bit of that see what emerges work, because you're not necessarily going to come out with a clear conference presentation in the way that sometimes our scholarship protocols demand of us, or the structures that we're in. And balancing that is the kind of work that my track is in, right? We want to make sure everyone goes back with what they need, but also with the ideas to get those things that they need worked through in a new and different way. If I were going to think about 2 things for digital scholarship in terms of getting started, digital scholarship can mean lots of things to lots of people, but I think of it as really working in complexity, in a time of complexity. And you got to start with the scholarship that you're already doing. So what counts in those protocol type ways in your environment, and figuring out how doing it in how adapting it to perhaps that digital economy or that attention economy may bring you new audiences, new collaborators, new networks, new benefits for you or your students, and making kind of like starting small, starting with a couple of small changes. You can't do all the things, nobody can, right? But figuring out what couple of things you're looking to do and how you get into that commons that is still part of the participatory digital, for all the rest of it is fraught. That's one piece. The other piece is, in order to do that, you kind of do need a digital identity. And so working through the challenges of digital identity. My course spent yesterday morning with Sherry Spelich's course on digital identity, and we talked a lot about the risks of being public as a scholar, the pressures to be public as a scholar, how being open about what you do has different risks for, women with opinions, for people of color, especially for women of color, where speaking openly can get you treated in very, very risky ways. And as so many scholars now are precarious, and do not have the protection of long-term jobs, some people are going to weigh those kind of that cost benefit analysis and go, I'm only willing to do X. And that is totally legitimate. So it's what you need to get done and ways you can open that up perhaps to a commons and benefit from it, or choose not to in other places.
That's a good, both for good 1 steps and 2 steps. So it's like a 1-2 step for and there's a nice little intersection there. But let's hear from some of the virtual attendees. There's a lot of talk there with like balancing ethos and stuff. Like, what is that balance for you folks between where do we find that in digital pedagogy, in critical digital pedagogy, OER, wherever your space is? How do you balance ethos and stuff? Anybody want to take that?
I'm not sure if I can quite answer that one, but I think there's something Bonnie said there about what counts in your digital pedagogy space. And I thought it was interesting that you said you've got a range of participants in your session that are coming from very different backgrounds, from community colleges, from higher education, independent scholars. And I think, and again, increasingly with more precarity across the sector, many of us are straddling these spaces. And what counts can look very different in these spaces. And I think particularly if you're working as an open practitioner, what maybe counts in your place of work and what counts within your open education community can be two very different things. And I think sometimes balancing these, what can be quite conflicting demands, can be quite difficult at times. And it's like a constant negotiation about what counts in the different kind of spheres that you're active in.
I absolutely agree, Lorna. And I mean, most of the years when I built my open network, that kind of digital side of my practice, it was because I was precarious and in a fairly challenging work situation.
Yes.
Situation. And it was the open stuff that gave me that feeling that I had a cohort of learners, a cohort of educators, a network of people to draw on, and opportunities that I was still building a career, even if it wasn't really recognized in my institution. And so there are, in some ways, the worse the institutional side is, perhaps sometimes the easier it is to see the benefits of open, although the risks are still there. But when folks have a pretty good gig going on institutionally, it can be harder to step out or see the reasons why you might want to step out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because you get acculturated to this is how we do things.
And I have succeeded in the way that we do things.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Stephanie, you're in the inclusive design track, right?
I am not.
So then what do you see then, but then in terms of scholarships or digital scholarship there, and in terms of just the way that the conference is designed, what evidence do you see of inclusion overall as the event planner?
Yeah, and that's a big question. I can address this, I think, in I want to say 2 different ways. The actual design, I have actually never been to another conference, academic conference. DPL is the first I've ever attended, ever helped with. And I think it's really gotten me to think about this conference in a very unique way. We have cohorts, as we all said, rather than sessions, and we have workshops, but our entire thing is we have workshops on one day and we have cohorts the rest of the day. So you really get to build that community and you really get to know the people that you are working with and you are here with. And I think that is wonderful, and it helps you build connections. You can stay connected at post DPL, but also in, I just lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's been very, very busy.
So I'll say, as a first-time attendee at DPL compared to the conferences that I've attended, if we want to talk about inclusive, there is a kind of an ethic of radical hospitality and welcome here for everyone that is A, striking, and B, the way it should be everywhere, right? So what are the food choices for us, for those of us who have to think about types of food? The accessibility of the building spaces, the solicitation of, how are things, what can we do to help you be in this space and get what you need out of this space without, making it seem like you have to get extra special accommodation. Like, how much can we build a space that welcomes and includes people right away? And there's so much care and effort that's been put into that and to maintaining that I think it's a really important example.
That was actually my train of thought that you guys said, and I was like, okay, perfect. So
it's therapy dogs.
Yeah.
I sat down with Sean when we were planning this, and I helped with catering and everything, and we tried to make sure that there was a vegan option for everybody. We made sure that those who have allergies and who are even on keto and paleo have things that they can eat, because you're here for 5 long days. We want you to be fueled, and we think of that in our breakfast as well. We have very light breakfast, but we have like gluten-free options, and we provide van rides. Like the Marriott's a 1.5 miles away, and it's hot out, and we're not going
And I haven't walked once.
Right?
And like we try to care about our people, because what we preach and what we're here for is to care for our students, to care for one another. And how are we going to do that if we don't set the environment for that?
Are there any, thanks so much, Stephanie. Are there questions from any of the panelists, virtual panelists, that they have for the on-site buddies? You don't have to, just want to give everybody the opportunity to speak.
I wonder if I could just ask Kevin in particular, you were talking about the workshop on inclusive design, and I know certainly in Ireland where we're doing a lot nationally around universal design for learning, and I'm just wondering, what are the parallels or the distinctions between the two? Is it a sense of sort of approach or the way you think about it? I wonder if you've had any comments on it.
Yeah, that's a good question. We have UDL has sort of been suffused throughout much of what we've been talking about, I think. And, because accessibility is part of welcoming, right? Like if you're in a space where you can't access the things in that space, then you're not included. So we've actually, so someone had put in the group chat that, if you do a Google search for inclusive design versus inclusive design in education, then it's interesting to see the differences. And so one of the things that I think has been rewarding for us is to bring in examples from sort of the larger design field, so we talked a little bit about weaponized design. Or do you create platforms that can easily be weaponized against some of the users, Twitter and harassment, for example. We talked about, what are implicit norms that are cooked into some of the design principles that we use? What's baked into the cake in terms of the typical user or the typical, male or female or whatever, that you're using to sort of base metrics on. So we've talked a lot about that, I think, and how that might inform our practice. And then with UDL, UDL principles are a really important part of inclusive design. But then there are also times, UDL sometimes gets used institutionally to talk about one size fits all. And that might not be, sometimes that you need to have one size fits one over and over again in a space. And so what might that look like? And so that might be the one point of, where they bump up against each other a little bit. But, I think an ethic of inclusive design, I think all of us in the room have, we've sort of made that implicit assumption that UDL is something that absolutely should, and must effectively inform this kind of work. Did I capture that well for what we're doing?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
That's great. That's really interesting. And I think it sort of lends to what was said just before this about that notion of care for students. I think it's all linked, isn't it? That the people that I find who really care for their students are the ones who are already incorporating the inclusivity in their teaching without even being aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Can I say something?
Please.
Yeah, I think one of the things which we were discussing, and I think it will also clarify more about your question, is that we were discussing that when we as teachers are designing our lessons or designing our courses, we need to question ourselves that who are these learning spaces for? Are these learning spaces for us to teach and flourish in our teaching, or for the students who are coming in who have some expectation of either learning or getting credits or whatever the expectation is? And I think that's very, very important. And I think this is one of the best things I'm going to take back from your course.
Cool.
It's going to, I design spaces for my students still, but I think there's still some room where I need to improve myself. Yeah.
And that's the thing of it, we don't get this, there's no way to get it all right all the time, and that's so that critical reflection, is we reflect on our practice and our spaces and how might I do things differently? How should I do things differently? How might I sustain current practices that I have? And just that the willingness to sit with ourselves and do that kind of work.
Thanks. That's actually, I wrote down a ton of notes because I'm going to use most of that in my classes with my students. So Bonnie, you keep talking a lot about the attention economy and how the digital scholarship, we got to do this attention economy thing. Is that something that we should be recreating in scholarship?
I'm not so sure that it's something that we should be recreating in scholarship. I think that in the world that we live in, there are times or things that people might want to do with their scholarship in which you need to play to an extent in the attention economy in order to gain an audience for that piece of scholarship or work, or for the identity that you're putting out there, right? If I had a locked Twitter account and had never met any of you, I wouldn't get to be in here or in this conversation. And so sometimes I don't necessarily mean like you want to be in the New York Times. I mean, you want to be out there in the attention economy enough that a couple of people read your blog post that you spent hours working on, and maybe you get to have a conversation about that in the comments. So it isn't necessarily about leveraging it to its like maximal capacity, because that can cause virality is always a problem. Basically, it's not actually fun to be leveraged to a huge collapsed audience of eyes. But expanding beyond, I spent most of the early part of my career in a very regional, isolated place where there weren't a lot of people doing the work that I was interested in, and I wanted to have community. And so it was the attention economy, in a sense, that allowed me to be like, hi, I'm doing this. Is anybody interested? On that note, before we go, I just want to say we are doing an intro Twitter chat for folks at DPL who want to try it out and see what it's like. We're doing it at 3 p.m. EST today, so in 2.5 hours. If you check the hashtag DigPed, there's a little welcome to it, and we would love to have anybody join us.
Different hashtag or just the DigPed one?
Just hashtag DigPed.
Perfect. Well, everybody, that's awesome. So I think that's a great way to close out, that we're going to rejoin this conversation on Twitter at 3 p.m. EST. Any final words from any of their other on-site buddies before we hand it off to the fabulous Terry Green?
Wish you were here.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yes, wish you were too.
Good to see you, Bonnie.
Great to
Thanks,
see you
guys.
Take care.
And I was kind of surprised because I thought, well, gee, that Kate Malloy sure looks like Bonnie. And then I turned out it was Bonnie.
Not so much. And if anyone wants to hang in that room, we're next door doing another session in about 2 minutes. So,
Terry,
I think we'll stay here. I'm just
Okay.
Take care, folks. Have a great day.
Bye.
bye.
Bye.